A lot of the questions that were just had actually are the perfect segue. We didn't set that up, but I appreciate the questions. The one question about the gas tax, I'll answer a couple questions before I start my presentation. There is a lot of talk in Washington about it. We've spent a lot of time talking about it. Others have. The short and simple answer to your question, I think, is if you see a giant package put together that would solve a lot of our fiscal problems, I think that we could potentially have the gas tax included in that, fixing that. Of a historical note, I would quote Chairman Oberstar, the first couple of gas tax increases were done on a voice vote on the House and Senate floor. There was no opposition. This is back in the 50s. Now we have opposition to the time of day, so it is a little bit complicated to get to that point. And I agree with your comment that how do we do a better job of educating people about some of these issues. ASCE has taken it, and this is my segue to what I'm going to talk about. ASCE has taken it upon itself in some regards as we're the folks that maintain and hopefully build the nation's infrastructure with the help of a lot of others, but as an organization, we've taken it upon ourselves to try and educate people about what the state of our nation's infrastructure is. And as a result, first of all, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate coming to somewhere where it's 80 degrees when it's not 80 degrees in Washington. That's a good thing. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be 80 degrees. That was very nice yesterday, getting off the plane. I want to go through some of the findings of our latest report. I want to start by saying we do this report card for infrastructure. I'll talk about what's coming at the end. In 2009, we did the report card. It was the third one that we'd done, fourth one that we'd done, I'm sorry. We started doing them in 1998. We were not the first ones to do them, however. There was one that was done in 1988 that was done by a government commission. It laid out sort of the original findings, and we sort of decided 10 years later, hey, what's been going on with this? And so we've done one every 4 years since then. We got it onto a 4-year schedule. 2001, 2005, 2009 was our latest. We will come out with a new report card in March of 2013. As you can see, our infrastructure has a GPA of a D, which is not really a passing grade. Maybe it's barely passing grade. I'm sure my son would argue that that would be a passing grade. Estimated 5-year need, which is probably the most important number, is to be $2.2 trillion. In some of the research we've done, and I will admit that this number is a tricky number, and I'm happy to go into much more detail on it, but the simple fact is we feel that we're spending about half of that money right now, so that the investment gap, as we're calling it, the investment gap would be about $1 trillion or $1.1 trillion. What we also say, and this is a real picture, this was taken by one of our members. I can't remember the location, so I won't say what the location was. The good news is that's a bridge deck, so that, I mean, or maybe that's the bad news, I don't know, but it's not exactly a pothole quite that deep. I think that goes all the way down through the bridge. Americans are wasting 4 work days a year sitting in traffic. I don't know, some of you came in from the airport last night. There was a good amount of traffic. So we all waste a little bit of time that way. You know, if you look at another way, we're not here to talk about water. Leaky pipes cost us about 6 billion gallons of clean water every day. Someone spent the time to clean that water and start pumping it out to us, the consumers, and we lose about 6 billion gallons a day. You all know that across America we have roads and bridges that are old and need to be replaced. We have problems with our electric grid. I saw there's a session tomorrow afternoon about siting of transmission lines. I'm sort of interested in hearing what's going on with that. Our systems need to be modernized. A lot of times folks will stand up here, especially our members, and talk about how we're really living off the investments of our elders, the folks in the 50s and 60s and 70s who built all these things for us. The bill's coming due on some of that, and we need to start replacing our nation's infrastructure. At the end of our 2009 sort of report card effort, and it's interesting, it really has a life of its own. You know, people quote those numbers all the time. We're pleased about that. It does help to raise this level of concern about what's going on with our infrastructure. We kept getting the question from the media, from folks like you all, you know, Brian, or you know, ASC, what happens if we don't invest? We haven't really done a very good job of investing in the last decade or two. We haven't caught up with inflation. What happens if we don't do anything? we keep struggling, we keep, bumping along as it is now. So is it really going to matter? So ASC undertook something which is sort of, I think, a little interesting for engineers. We actually did a series of economic studies. So the engineers did not do those, which is the good news. But we had we contracted with some economists to help us figure out at the 2020 point and the 2040 point, what happens if we just keep investing at the same level that we're investing at? This was sort of our way to talk about what are the consequences if we don't invest. Our report card is really a snapshot sort of that year or that couple years, and it looks backwards. It looks at how many deficient bridges we have, how many dams we have that need repair, how many transit systems need more investment. These studies, this series of studies, looks forward and says, so in the year 2020, if we keep doing the same level of investment, how is that going to affect our economy? We did the studies in 4 different areas. You can see them up there: surface transportation, wastewater and drinking water, electric transmission, and last but not least, ports and inland waterways, airports, ports and inland waterways. I'm only going to talk about 2 of those since this is the Transportation Committee. What we found, and all of this stuff is available, we actually have a booth. Not that I'm pushing you to the booth, but I got a bunch of stuff there that I do not want to take home. It's also available on the internet. But what we found is we broke these studies down, and as we started doing them and thought about how we should explain them to the public, we looked at it from how it would affect businesses, how it would affect families, and how it would affect trade. And what we found is that the workers end up paying a heavy price. In the year 2020, 877,000 jobs would be lost because of our bad surface transportation infrastructure. And in the back of the study, if you look at the full study, there is a chart that actually details where those jobs are lost, and it's jobs across the economy. We are, I say this with some, hesitation. We're not as worried about engineering jobs or construction jobs. We understand that those are gained or lost by the level of investment. We're quite clear on that, and obviously we have a role in that. I would be not honest if I said otherwise. However, what's interesting is the other places that jobs are lost or gained. You'd be surprised that the one area of job growth, if we don't invest on our infrastructure, is auto mechanics. People are going to drive over potholes. They're going to see more wear and tear on their cars with worse roads, and so we'll need more auto mechanics. I'm not sure that, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not, it just shows that there is back and forth in the economy of these things. Between now and 2020, what it's also going to mean is that the cost of our transportation, the transportation costs are going to increase by about $430 billion. So having trucks on delivery stuck in traffic costs money. Having you and I stuck in traffic when we're trying to go to jobs. If a business has to hire another crew because they're a service business and their job is to their job is to go out and service your refrigerator when it breaks or your air conditioner or those sorts of things, they may have to hire more people. That makes them less efficient. It's a cost to the economy. In addition, we'll see a little bit of we'll see a lower standard of living. You can see the middle column up there. American families would earn about $700 less in a given year, in a year, and then they would spend $360 more a year. So that impact on a family is going to be about $1,060 per year, and that's real money and something we can all sort of understand. And then finally, our economy loses ground in that exports would drop by $28 billion in that year 2020. Exports drop in a bunch of different categories. It's not just in 1 or 2 areas. And then our gross domestic product would underperform, or be the growth of the nation would be under-realized, if you will, by close to $900 billion. So this link between the infrastructure and economic competitiveness, I think, is a little bit understood, but I think we've tried to make it a little bit better understood. These studies are helping us put a price tag on what we will pay for failing to invest in our infrastructure systems. These consequences play out every day. Traffic causes delays. We talked about that. If you have just-in-time shipment, if you have a factory that relies on just-in-time, if you're manufacturing and you rely on just-in-time shipment, and the truck can't deliver the next set of widgets to be put together with the other set of widgets, if you will, then you've got a whole crew of people that are sitting and waiting. And we have some good examples of things like that have happened. Clearly, failing to invest it does have a negative impact in our economy. The next one we looked at, the next study that we looked at is on this whole idea of ports, and we looked at it from airports, seaports, and then inland waterway ports. A little background, just, you know, these are just some numbers, and if you can read that, then you can drive anything you want without glasses. I cannot read that myself, so it's a little bit, it will be better inside the report that you pick up. Our aviation system has 20,000 civilian airports, although 5,200 of them are really public, if you will. Air passenger and air freight services are really concentrated in a very small number of airports. 80% of the origin and destination traffic in the U.S. is really in 15 markets, and it shows that up there. In addition, this is maybe a little bit better of a map to view up on the screen here. It talks about where our inland ports and waterways are. We have about 12,000 miles of inland waterways in our country, in intercoastal waterways, about 240 lock chambers, more than 566 million tons move through that inland transportation system annually. That's mostly, I mean, it's a lot of bulk commodities and goods that need to move large amounts, heavy, and the waterways are an efficient service for that. The greatest threats to our performance in this inland waterway system are the scheduled and unscheduled delays caused by the insufficient funding for operating and maintaining the locks. What's happening now is you've got a lot of unscheduled delays, so that you end up hanging up the barges when they weren't planning to be stopped. And currently you now have low water conditions, some of you know, on the Mississippi River, where now the barges they're literally stuck, because some of the, you know, if they ran, they would be run aground. A total of 90% of our locks and dams on the inland waterway system experienced some sort of unscheduled delay in 2009. That totaled, believe it or not, because of course people like to keep numbers, 19,000 hours of delay, which seems like a lot to me. About 3/4 of the spending needs for the inland waterways are really just for rehabilitating the current facilities. These are really old facilities. I think the average age is over 60 years. And when these things were being built and the way engineering worked back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they built for a 50-year life. We've exceeded the 50-year life on most of these facilities. We estimate that there's a funding gap of about $6 billion based on the current investment trends. When you look at the cargo, when you look at the big commercial ports, we have about 300 commercial and marine ports in our country. 2.3 billion tons of cargo a year go through these ports, and there's more than 600 smaller harbors. The system accommodates more than 16,800 annual vessel arrivals in 2010. One of the key challenges, obviously, for the U.S. as we look towards the future in these things is that in Panama, they are expanding the Panama Canal. They are making it deeper. They are adding another channel in the Panama Canal. And there will be larger vessels that will be able to get through there, and there's only, I believe, if my recollection serves me, 2 ports on the East Coast that can take those vessels. Not that every port should necessarily need to take those vessels, but 2 is probably not enough. And in fact, you know, in New York, I think that the current operation is that they're raising a bridge rather than, because they can't lower they can't dredge anymore, so they're actually raising a bridge so that they can get those larger boats in there. The spending needs for the marine ports in this analysis really focused on, just so we're clear on our study, dredging the channels to the authorized width and depth. We estimate the funding gap is going to be about $10 billion by 2020. And I guess the good news in this area, and when we look at the ports and we look at dredging, there is a trust fund, much like there is for the highway trust fund. There's a harbor maintenance trust fund. It has a balance. It has a surplus in it. Surplus is not spent every year. It actually has $6 billion sitting in there. I'm not sure. It's on the books somewhere. I'm not sure that that's actually real money. They get about $1.6 billion every year, but only $800 million a year is spent on dredging our nation's ports and harbors. So it's one of the things that we do need to focus on, and we have been in the Congress. A couple of points on our marine ports and our airports. To remain, and actually it's marine ports and the inland waterways. The freight shipments, as we look at the airports, which is the graphic on the right, freight shipments by air are expected to increase by 54% by 2020. But yet congestion's going to look like, congestion's going to cost us about $24 billion in 2012 and $34 billion in 2020. And then it'll reach $63 billion in congestion costs by 2040. Portions of our marine port system are in danger of becoming non-competitive when you can't get boats in, when you can't get these big ships in because you need to dredge more. They'll go to another port, or they have to have less and less cargo on them so that they can make the get into the port, but then that becomes cost ineffective. Today, as I said, there's a relatively large gap between the planned investment and the needs. Failing to meet this gap is going to harm the economy in a number of ways. As the price of goods rises, we'll become less competitive. There'll be a $270 billion decrease in exports by 2020. That's on the ports graphic on the left. Our GDP goes down $697 billion by 2020. Again, this is if the ports are not addressed. And really, that's across the board. I mean, I do find it interesting sometimes, you know, folks that sometimes, I've dealt with some folks who are more in the middle of the country, shall we say, and sometimes there's this disconnect about how important our port economy is. You know, the port in Wilmington is very important to the East Coast, and, you know, the port of Long Beach, it's important to get stuff to the middle of the country, but yet there's a disconnect about how important those things are. And the inland waterway system, of course, is one where if we're growing something, we want to export it in the middle of the country, we need that inland waterway system to get stuff out of our country. The job loss is pretty significant, as you can see. It's about 740,000 jobs in the year 2020. That cost, interestingly, is about $770 per person, remember, or per family. Remember, we talked about on the surface transportation side, it was about $1,060. And as I discussed this with our economist, you know, these numbers, these are two reports that could be added together. So if you look at the ports report and you look at the surface transportation report, we can actually probably add that 770 to the 1,060 and get about $1,700, which is the actual cost. You can see likewise in the aviation system, our exports would go down by $54 billion. And generally speaking, from the aviation side, the exports are high value or very perishable items, both incoming and outgoing. The GDP goes down $313 billion, and there's 350,000 jobs that it would be lost in that year, 2020. And that, if you can see that blast box way at the top, it's about $300, $320 per family per year if we don't start investing in those additional resources. So I have this last chart, which I have the caveat, I've been trying to keep it out of these presentations, but because I don't want you to think that you can add a line at the bottom and add all that together, because sometimes you can't add all that together. But the point simply is to lay out sort of, those are the kinds of numbers that we need in additional investment. Those are the GDP numbers that we're looking at losing if we don't make some additional investment. The job losses are obviously, as you can see, pretty significant. The cost to families is real, and we experience it every day if we don't invest in our infrastructure. And obviously, from an export side, we're also losing as well. I give you this last slide just to remind you that in March of 2013, the report card will come out. We're doing something a little bit different with our report card this time. It's all going to be available to you on your smart things, your smartphones, your tablets. We feel that that's going to be a much better way to distribute that to everybody. I will tell you, you know, as my aside comment for the, you know, as much as some of us like paper still, we printed 6,000 copies of the big fat report card book. You can take one of those, please, from the booth. There are still about 1,000 left because it's hard to distribute that many, but we feel like we can get the reach much, much broader when we allow you to access it through whatever means you want. We'll also have a lot of detailed state information in there, which is really what you guys want. Some of our local groups have done state and local report cards, that information will be accessible in there as well. If we've got good data from a state, we're using some of the TTI data on congestion. Trey, I know you'd appreciate that. And from other sources, we're trying to bring that in so that people can see what the effect is across the board on infrastructure. Not only, I talked a lot about the economic stuff, but also sort of if you want to know how many deficient bridges you have in your state, that information, we're pulling that right in from Federal Highway Administration, who gets that information straight from the state. So it'll be a pretty interactive tool for folks to use, and if you want to answer questions about the infrastructure, you'll be able to do that. All our stuff is there, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.